Hey, what's up guys? Austin here. So recently I did a video on this new recording system I have here in the studio, which is an RME UFX3 interface combined with the 12 mic preamp, which I'm using mainly to record drums. And that video was more of a high level overview of the system. But in this video, I want to give you a deeper look into how I use this to set up a zero latency headphone mix with effects, and why I consider this to be the optimal setup for monitoring and recording. So first, let's do a quick recap of the setup I got going here. So back behind me at the desk, I have the UFX3 interface, which is connected to the computer, and the computer is running two displays that are stacked vertically, and that's the main station that I really run everything from. So all the RME software, logic, everything is actually being run back there. But over here at the drums, I have a little remote control station set up. So in the side rack here, I have the 12 mic, which I plug all the microphones into, and I can easily control it within arm's reach here. And on top, I have my old 27-inch iMac that I've repurposed as a display to control the main computer. So you can see here, I have a trackpad and a keyboard, and I can easily swipe up and down to get to the two different displays back there. So this is the top display, and this is the bottom display. And I have full control over everything right from here. And I'm doing this through the screen sharing app, which is built into Mac OS. So quick pro tip for you: if you do this screen sharing between two Macs, try to connect them with an Ethernet cable if you can, because it's going to give you a more stable connection than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi can work, but Ethernet is better, okay? But this is the configuration of everything I got going here, and it's a pretty efficient setup and it works pretty well. All right, now let's get into the software and how I have everything laid out here. This top display is what I call my RME control display, and it's really three different applications. In the top right, this is TotalMix FX, which is their mixing and routing software that comes with the interface. And this is where you're going to set up your zero latency headphone mix and apply effects, which we're going to get into more here in a minute. But I keep this up here in the top right. Wrapped around here to the left, this is DigiCheck, which is their metering software. So I keep all 16 inputs along with the computer audio going full blast into these meters all the time, so I can constantly see what's going on. In the top left, this is a vector audio scope. Down here, this is a loudness meter, and over here, this is a spectral analyzer. And down here in the bottom right, this is what they call the RME connector app. And this is essentially giving you a software version of the 12 mic preamp, and they're linked together in real time, which is very cool. So just to show you how this works here, if I grab my voice on channel 3 on the preamp, you can see it changes here in real time. So if I take the gain up and down, you can see it's changing there. Or I could use the trackpad and the app and control it right from here, and it affects it just the same. So it's a very cool little system they have worked out here, and it gives you flexibility to either use the app or use the actual preamp itself. It's up to you. But it's nice to have this kind of bird's eye view of all the settings on your preamp, so you can see, you know, all your phantom power, all your gain settings, all your signal levels. So it's just a very cool little app to keep open all the time. And just to give you a quick rundown on the inputs I'm using here, I have my iPad with a stereo cable breaking out into channels 1 and 2. So that's labeled iPad left and iPad right. And if I play the click, you can see that coming in there. And then my voice is on channel 3. And then on the drums, we got overhead left, overhead right, kick drum, snare drum, aux snare, rack tom, floor tom. And then I have two empty channels at the end here. So if I wanted to expand the drums later, I could. And these are feeding into these channels here in TotalMix. So you can see it's the same setup: iPad, voice, overhead left and right, kick, snare, aux rack, floor. But this is my RME control screen. It just gives me an overview of everything, and I have complete control over this entire ecosystem. And down here on the bottom, this is my Logic screen, which is where I would normally be recording everything into its own individual track and then mixing it later. But this is kind of a special situation for this particular video. So you can see here, I'm recording a track here at the top that is titled 12 mic. And what I'm doing right now is I'm actually recording my headphone output because I want you to hear exactly what's going into my headphones when I set up this headphone mix. So I'm not recording everything like normal and then mixing it later. I'm just doing a real-time mix of this headphone output so you can hear exactly what I'm hearing, okay? But this is the software layout that I like to keep. I have the RME control screen on top and then Logic on the bottom, and I just go back and forth between the two. All right, before we get into the details of this headphone mix, you might be wondering, what's the point of having all these different applications? Why not just monitor everything through Logic? Well, for me, there's two main reasons why I don't like to do that. The first is that no matter what you do, there's always going to be some amount of latency when you monitor through the DAW. Now you can try to take your I/O buffer size as low as you can, like 32 or 64 samples, which can minimize the latency. But depending on the power of your computer and what kind of plugins you're running, you could run into some problems where you get dropouts or clicks or pops or weird things going on. So for me, I don't want to fool with any of that. I like to use the zero latency software that comes with the interface. So I know that I'm just getting the sound straight from the microphone into the preamp, into my headphones with effects, zero latency, okay? Now, the second reason why is just more of a convenience thing. I don't want to be tied to a Logic project to hear everything mixed in my headphones. I want my headphones ready to go 24/7 with it mixed inside TotalMix, completely independent of Logic. So whether I want to record in Logic or not, I still have everything mixed in my headphones exactly like I want it to be. So those are the two main reasons why I like to have this kind of setup where I monitor everything through TotalMix, but I just use Logic to record and mix separately, okay? All right, now let's get into this headphone mix. So let me start by just showing you the difference between the mixed sound and the dry sound, just to give you some perspective on what we're trying to achieve here. So this is with everything fully mixed. And this is what they sound like completely dry. So as you can hear, there's a pretty dramatic difference between those two sounds. And honestly, the dry mix sounds like crap, in my opinion. So what am I doing to get to that mixed sound? Well, inside TotalMix here, there are 4 things that I can do. And those are panning, EQ, compression, and reverb. Just those 4 things right there can dramatically change the sound of your drum mix in your headphones. So let's go ahead and start with panning. So as you can see here on the drum tracks, they're all panned straight up the center, which is what makes it sound pretty terrible. So what we want to do is we want to create a nice stereo spread from left to right. So if I go to the overhead left, I could either drag this knob to the left, or I could double click in here and just type in exactly what I want. And this is my preferred way to work with TotalMix. So I'm just going to put the overhead at left 60. The overhead right is going to right 60. So now we got a nice stereo spread. In the overheads, I'm going to keep the kick and snare straight up the center. This aux snare I want fully to the left. So I'm going to make that left 60. The rack tom is a little bit off to the right. So I'm going to make that R20. And then the floor tom I want all the way to the right. So I'm going to make that R60. Okay, so now we have the kit panned out left and right, and that's going to give us a nice stereo image. So let's hear what just that panning is doing. Okay, so that's step one. We still got some work to do, but that's a pretty good start. So let's move on to EQ. So you can see here on every channel, we have an EQ and a compressor built right in. So if I go to the EQ on the overhead left here, I'm just going to go ahead and activate the curve that I like to put on the overheads. And I'm going to do the same thing on overhead right. So I'm just cutting up to about 200, and I'm also cutting a little bit of the mids at 500 and doing a little bit of a shelf from 5K up, which is just going to thin the overheads out a little bit, take away some of the low end, and add a little more sparkle in the high end. And I'm going to go through the rest of the drums here and just activate all the EQs. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these EQ details, but you can see everything here. So if you need to come back and look at these for some ideas, you can definitely do that. So activating the snares here, and then moving on to the rack tom and the floor tom here. Okay, so these are all the different EQ curves I put on all the different drums. So now let's hear what this sounds like with the EQ activated. All right, so now we're getting much closer to a good sound here. So with that EQ, it just sounds much cleaner. I'm boosting the lows and the kick and the toms, but I'm cutting out a lot of the lows and the overheads. So that just cleans everything up and gets rid of that mud. Okay, now let's move on to compression. So if I go to the overhead left, I can go ahead and activate the compressor, and on the overheads I just do a very subtle 2-to-1 compression, and for all the other mics I do a 3-to-1. So on the kick I'm doing 3-to-1, and I also do a pretty slow attack and a fast release. So I do the attack at 50 and the release at 100, and I do that for all the close drum mics here. So let's go through and just activate all these here. All right, so now we have all the compression activated. So let's hear what that's doing to the sound. All right, so that compression is just making everything a little bit more even. It's making everything kind of gel together, and I'm not getting crazy spikes from like the snare drum transients and things like that. So it's really just a matter of kind of taming down those transients a little bit. So that's everything I do for the EQ and compression. And now we can move on to the last magical step, which is reverb. So the way you work with reverb in TotalMix is you send over to the reverb, which I have set up here on the right. And I could either use this fader here to send, or I could go in here and type in exactly where I want this to be. So I know that I like to keep this at -15 for the overheads. So I'm just going to go ahead and type that in. And for the kick, I don't like a lot of kick in the reverb, so I just put that at -30. I really like a lot of reverb in the overheads and the snares, but not so much in the kick or the toms. So I'm doing the snares at -15, and then for the toms, I'm just going to put these at -24, so they're in there just a little bit, but not too much. Okay, so now we're sending over to this reverb here. And if you're already an RME user and maybe you've been struggling to find a good reverb sound for drums, I've done a lot of experimentation and I've found that this is a pretty good setting here. So if you use the space model here with these particular settings, it gives you a pretty good result. Okay, so let's hear what this reverb sounds like. So it's very subjective on how much reverb you want to add into your mix, but I personally like a lot of reverb in my headphone mix, but it's very easy to dial in exactly what you want. So now that's pretty much it. We've done the full mix. So we have everything panned, we have EQ, compression, and reverb on. So let's go back and forth one more time just to show you the difference between this fully mixed sound and the dry sound. So this is the mixed sound. And now the dry sound. So as you can see, just being able to apply these essential effects like EQ, compression, reverb, these kinds of things, and makes a dramatic difference in the sound of everything. And you'd be surprised how much it changes your experience on the drums while you're playing. Because when you can hear yourself crystal clear with a nice ambience from the reverb and a nice stereo spread and no latency at all, that's just like the optimal drumming experience, in my opinion. And there's really not too many systems out there that allow you to do this, because I've had other interfaces in the past and pretty much all of them will give you like a zero latency mixer, but most of them don't allow you to add effects. So there's usually trade-offs with most systems, but this one really kind of gives you everything in a very streamlined and powerful package. So really, you're just kind of limited by your creativity on what you want to do. So if you want to learn more about these RME units, I'll have my Sweetwater affiliate links below. So definitely go check those out if you're interested. But hopefully you found this informative, and maybe it gave you some ideas for what to think about when setting up your own home recording situation. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.